And today's guest, he is heading as a Vice President and Global Head of Science and Technology at Dotmatics. Some of them keep telling me that AI is a bubble, there's nothing. Using AI as their number one tooling.
Wow, that went very fast. 10 episodes of Legends of Biotech, and here we are again with the 11th legend. But hey, before we get started, thank you so much for being with us in this journey where we are covering the achievers in biotech and life sciences domain. And today's guest stands at the boundary of science. Of course, he has vast experience in life sciences, but he has now transformed into a tech genius. And today, he is heading as a Vice President and Global Head of Science and Technology at Dotmatics. Yes, you heard me right. Dotmatics, the same company which got acquired recently by Siemens for $5.1 billion. So today, I'm joined by Alister Campbell, who is the Vice President of this company. His career spans from bench in medicinal chemistry to working with companies like AstraZeneca, Merck, GSK. And then he came to the forefront of scientific informatics and software innovations for the life sciences industry. His journey reflects a rare blend of deep scientific expertise clubbed with visionary leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, this is not a normal legend. He is someone who is reshaping the whole innovation platform of life sciences research. AI reshaping the role of drug hunters. That's going to be the theme of today. And we are going to talk about how this $5.1 billion acquisition of Dotmatics by Siemens is going to mean, what it will mean for the future of life sciences R&D. From unifying data across discovery to manufacturing to understanding how AI can accelerate decision making while navigating challenges is what Alister is an expert. And whether you're a biotech professional, whether you're a researcher, whether you are passionate about AI or computational biology, or whether you are tech bio enthusiast, this episode is going to give you a lot of insights. So let's dive into the conversation with Alister Campbell, the legend for today. Hi, Alister. Thank you so much for joining in today on this call. It is really indeed a pleasure to be hosting you today. So welcome to the 11th episode of Legends of Biotech. You are our 11th legend. So let's get started by learning more about your journey so far in your life.
Yeah, so firstly, huge thanks for having me today and for the very kind introduction. So I guess my journey here came from I would class myself as a geeky kid. I loved science. That was always my science and maths. And I ended up finding my way through my university career studying chemistry and ended up as a medicinal chemist and working. Initially, the first part of my career was working at the Neurosciences Research Centre for Merck in the UK. And for me, that was a real grounding. That was the place that I came across some of the smartest, most thought leadership style scientists I've ever met in my career, even to this day. But also that part of my career has given me the understanding that life sciences is incredibly difficult. Even then, back in 2000, working on projects at the time we believed were going to be groundbreaking for Alzheimer's disease. Even to this day, we have now really not got a better handle on that disease. And it really shows you the challenges that we face. So back then, I was a green chemist joining and wanting to really shape how we could change medicine. And then I went through my career in medicinal chemistry through the changes in the UK biotech and pharmaceutical sector. But then I made a shift into scientific software. And And that was really because I could see there was a real need. I could see that the scientists in the lab back in those days were really struggling with informatics. There was some informatics available. There was software out there, but really the majority of knowledge was stored in the heads of those scientists in the lab. So we had these folk in the lab who were the real savants, the real people who knew how to solve the problems. And there wasn't really an easy way for scientists to know that information other than just gaining experience. So really our whole philosophy around Dotmatics, our idea was, how do we build software that allows scientists to derive that knowledge? How can they look at the information and allow a junior chemist to know the same as that senior chemist who's been doing it for 30 years?
Right. So let's look at this now. You started as a medicinal chemist, and so how this transition happened? What drew you to data, software tools of R&D? How exactly, at what point in time you realized that the bottleneck in drug discovery isn't only about the molecules, but about how we are handling data, workflows, and decisions? When this transition happened?
Yeah, so for me, it happened early because when one of my first roles was I worked off the back of, people remember the combinatorial chemistry boom that happened. I sort of joined Merck around the end of that, but we were still making chemical libraries. So I was used to handling larger volumes of data, larger volumes of chemicals than most other people were, because that's how we work. But that gave me an idea, is that Excel is not the tool for this job, and that's really where we were at that time. So it showed me that there was got to be a better way of doing this, and this was also around the time of the first incarnation of electronic lab notebooks came along. So this was firstly the first opportunity where scientists could start to think about digitally transforming what they did in the lab. Instead of taking paper notes, suddenly we had this way of recording scientific outcomes in a way that was shareable. And I used to laugh. My boss back at Merck, he was a phenomenal scientist, but if anyone ever read his lab notebook, it was like reading hieroglyphics. You were having to interpret some scientist noodlings, and actually having some digital transformation way of doing it, really a way that digital capture really made the data better. Straight away, you could look at someone's book, you could copy it, you could understand how they did it. These were just the real starting points for the whole industry. And that's really transformed. Now that modalities have changed, we've moved from just working purely in small molecule world. We know that all of the different types of research that's going on within the labs, they all have their own challenges. So we're trying to use the learnings of the past to allow us to do a much better job of storing and managing that data into the future.
Wonderful. So now, Alister, I would like to understand about AI in drug discovery. Let's jump right into the topic. And in your recent interview on one of the websites, you talk about, so the title was How AI is Upgrading the Drug Hunter. You talk about smaller pods, faster loops, and you mentioned that the teams are getting smaller in size, but the efficiency is going up. So how do you see this happening in the future? Let's say another 3 to 5 years, how the drug discovery teams will be created or will exist in the future?
Yeah, so historically, if you look at a drug discovery team, it was a very multifaceted team. There would be the chemists, there would be the in vitro pharmacologist, there would be the in vivo team, there would be the drug metabolism people. The team would be really big, and that meant that you had to really involve lots of different people along the way. You had to really and everyone it was very empirical science. It was do something, test it, interpret it yourself. And that was happening in a sort of slow loop. It happened. We had drugs, right? We did develop things, but there was definitely inefficiencies in that process. And what we've now got is the ability to do stuff where we can be a lot more predictive. So instead of having to, as I was describing, doing this combi chem approach where let's make everything and test everything, and that's the way to be efficient. Actually, now we can be far more targeted. Drug discovery teams don't have to make everything anymore, because they can be more predictive, because the data we have allows us to learn more from what we have done before. So these small teams are really being driven by data scientists now. So these are people who have got a good computational understanding, who can run algorithms, who can run programs, but also understand the science. So they can understand how can I optimize, do a multi-parameter optimization on a lead compound or a lead biologic to mean that I've got the right properties against the target that I care about, but also optimizing to make sure that I don't have off-target activities against the things that could give me problems with toxicity or whatever it may be further downstream. So that cycle can get tighter because the data is better and the scientists can make fast decisions because they get their data back in a more interpretable way more quickly.
All right. So, Alistair, I talk to a lot of people in science, and especially the old scientists who are now in their 50s and 60s, from multiple countries, actually. And some of them keep telling me that AI is a bubble. There's nothing tangible which will come out of this. So let's, shut the critics down by asking the legend, which is you. You have seen it all. So if you could tell us, what are some of the most surprising and impactful breakthroughs you have seen so far in your career, wherein AI was used to come up with some great research in drug discovery or anywhere else? If you could throw some light on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are a number of organizations out there who are using AI as their number one tooling. So there's companies like In Citro or Recursion. These pharmaceutical companies have made it their thing where they will use AI as part of that drug discovery pipeline. And they've been very bullish about saying, we are going to make more candidates than ever. We are going to get to clinical studies quicker than ever. And that's a big claim to make because investors are the first people to recoil when things don't go right. But actually, if you look at their successes, they have got many candidates into clinical studies quicker than you would normally expect. Everyone, we hear this usual term of drug discovery takes a decade. It takes $2.5 billion. These are the sort of generic phrases and terms that we know in the industry. But we also know of that 10 years of discovery, maybe 3 years of it is that early stage discovery process of identifying a target, then finding a hit, then developing that into a lead and taking that candidate through to early clinical. So that 3-year process, these companies have genuinely managed to bring that down to 18 months. And 18 months doesn't seem like a big saving in reality, but actually it's a huge saving because we also saw during COVID what we can do if the regulatory authorities allow us to work the clinical trials in a different way, where we can start to overlap clinical trials rather than making them a very long linear process. We managed to get through the clinical trial process much quicker. So if we can shave off some time in the discovery phase, maybe half it, maybe less, maybe more, but then squeeze that clinical phase at the end, we might get to the point where we're taking that 10-year lifespan maybe down to 7 or 6 years. And firstly, that's going to have a benefit to the patient. We get drugs to them faster, but also it makes it cheaper because in reality, the cost is we make it 5 years or 10 years, that's a doubling of cost and time. So if we can bring the cost down, the benefits to the patient are that they get drugs quicker and they get them cheaper. And we can start to really deal with quite difficult, as we look at the industry now, the low-hanging fruit of drug discovery is gone. The things that are left over are the hard-to-reach diseases. They may be the diseases that we understand the biology poorly. They might be ones where it manifests itself in different patient populations very differently, even though it might have a sort of broad stroke sort of nomenclature. So what we allows us to do is really to target patients, target them with the right drug, and hopefully we can get things to them and we can start to see a real tangible benefit to humanity. And in reality, I think the last count I saw was there is approximately 20 or 25 drugs in clinical studies right now with the FDA where the AI has been cited as a major component of the discovery of that drug.
Right. So, Alister, see, I'm myself a big AI fan, AI enthusiast. But, for the sake of this podcast and for our audience, it's always good to look at both sides. So when there are roses, there are going to be thorns. Okay. So when we talk about the AI's achievability in drug discovery, there are certain things which is still not sticking sometimes. Like, for example, the data quality, interpretability, regulatory hurdles, or integration into existing lab decision-making workflows. So, which one do you think is the hardest to crack in this world of AI in drug discovery era?
Yeah, I think there's a number of parts to unpick there. There's, as you say, like AI is used as this broad stroke, but within drug discovery, AI comes in so many different types. And I think you're absolutely right. I think there will be a number of parts where AI will flop. We'll try it in certain areas and it will not be the right fit. So I think the areas where it becomes more of a co-pilot to a scientist, it becomes a sort of predictive and a guidance tool for them so that they can start to help their decision making processes. I think those are the areas where it's going to be super important. Also, I think the areas where it's incredibly number heavy, the stuff where you need large computing and algorithmic powers. So I think when we start thinking of taking patient data from clinical studies and bringing that back to discovery, the volumes of data there are huge. And like trying to find that needle in the haystack that humans aren't very good at doing, things like AI are going to be much better at helping us interpret that data. So I think it's going to be good for us to help maybe look for helping the target discovery area, because we can actually start look for fingerprints from the sort of human patient population to identify the right target. Whereas at the moment, we still lose a huge volume of our candidates in clinical studies just simply because we had the wrong target. So if we can shave that off, we can make that process better. And that's going to come from, as you very rightly said, quality of data. Like good quality clinical data being married up with very high quality preclinical and discovery data. How do we marry those things up? If we do that right, if we get the right data being captured, so capturing at the point of entry rather than waiting for some human like dictating and writing things down, those are points of error, of course. So we need systems where data is captured at the point of entry, it's annotated at once it moves its way through these drug discovery pipelines, and then when we use it in a model, one of the key things it's going to be is going to be thinking about understanding the why something has been predicted. The being given a predictive number or a predicted value, that's one part of it. Understanding why the AI predicted that. The scientists can then look at the prediction, can look at the reasoning and the rationale, and then understand whether that's a sensible leap to make. And that's one of the hardest things is the understandability of the prediction. I think scientists will be more comfortable if they understand why it's not some black box that's just generating some figures. So those things together are going to give us a place where there will be wins, there will be losses, but I think the net outcome will be very positive.
Of course. So thank you so much for that detailed answer to this. Loved it. But now let's talk about Dotmatics. Recently got acquired. You guys offer tools like ELNs, LIMS, or scientific workflow platforms. Now let's look at Dotmatics offerings and how this AI-powered R&D is happening. How do you think your platform or other such platforms will evolve to support these AI-powered R&D in the future? What features do you think you are going to add?
Yeah, so we made a big shift about 4 years ago. So we had been building our platforms using, I guess, traditional technologies that everyone sort of databases that people have been using for the past 30 years. And they became the sort of de facto standard of how people store information. But as we move forward, we started looking at how the industry had shifted, not just the pharmaceutical industry, but we can see it across into other vertical industries. And AI has become one of these things where it's the AI itself is not the thing that people care about. It's the data that you feed to the AI that's the important thing. The AI is a commodity. So what we made a choice of doing is we were one of the first life sciences organizations that partnered with Databricks. So Databricks is obviously now a vast organization. I think it's $100 billion company themselves, but they have become. The important thing is they have database-like capabilities, but their key component that we will lend into is that it's a computing engine underlying it. So we wanted to build our data structures that underlying it were computing engines that were AI ready. And we started building our Luma platform with that idea in mind. We needed a way that we captured data at the point of source, so connecting to devices and instrumentation in lab, in its unadulterated form, then storing that, parsing it, and really having the data stored into a format that we trust. So then on top of that, we now have this tooling that we now, because we made that choice of partnering with Databricks, we've got the computing power to handle, the three V's of big data: the velocity, variety, and then the volume that comes with it. So we can handle that now. So that allows us, our customers, to work in this lab in a loop paradigm. So where you're getting data coming from instrumentation, feeding it into these systems, pipelining it, and then that loop of putting the data into the model, learning from it, feeding the model again, predicting the next thing to do, and cycling round and round. That becomes more of an automated process. And you can only do that if you've got something that really has a data-first strategy. Often in the past, the science came first and the data came after. So we thought, well, and this is how companies like Recursion and In Citro have built their own platforms for their pharmaceutical companies, is that they have a data-first strategy. They think about, if we want to do this work, what type of data do we capture and how do we want to use it? So let's build our systems to suit that, rather than capturing some stuff and then figuring out how to use the data afterwards. That's the old way of working. So that's really made a big shift, and it's something we did with our Luma platform. And now, as Dotmatics has evolved and we go into Siemens, that's become a really important strategy for us, because Siemens, we are part of the Siemens Digital Industries Software Department. They already have a huge platform of the software suite, but what they didn't have is anything that sat in the discovery phase of life sciences, and it was something that they want to build, what Siemens call the digital thread. So they want this single piece of information that can flow from the earliest point in discovery processes all the way through sort of discovery, through development, into clinical trials, through to productization and sending it off into market. They want this digital thread idea so that we can trace everything from its instigation all the way through its process. So this is really exciting for us, because we never really stepped beyond the sort of early phase of development. So now Siemens bring that part, we bring the early phase of discovery, and we now feel that we can really start to address some of the big challenges of going from discovery all the way through to manufacturing.
Wow. So I'm sure this synergy is going to really work out well, and Siemens is going to benefit a lot from this acquisition. Actually, you already answered my next question. It was supposed to be, what's your interpretation of this acquisition, and you have already answered that. So let me move on to the next question, and let's shift the gear now. And I would like to ask you, let's say that there is a molecular biologist or somebody who is just getting started with their career in life sciences research. How important do you think this data science or interoperability between the AI and molecular biology, and learning of both sides of the coin, not just the wet lab but also the dry lab like bioinformatics and stuff like that? How important this would be for any molecular biologist or anybody who's getting started in the career in life science? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think it's super important. I only really came into the informatics area in my later years of my 20s, so I was a little bit slower. But at that time, the whole industry hadn't developed quite to the extent it has now. So I would say that anyone coming out from university or academia coming towards industry, I would really make sure that you have a very multifaceted sort of type of understanding. You don't have to be the great thing actually about a lot of the AI technologies that we have now is you don't have to be an expert in many of these things to be able to utilize them. The utilization of prompts and the right type of tooling can allow someone who's a non-expert to make really great inroads into this. I would say always be curious. Like anyone, like download large language models onto your laptop, try them, play with them, give them interesting prompts, make little projects for home, do all these things because they all add into your career. And when you get downstream, you never really know. I never had a thought that I would end up in this position in my career when I was starting off in the lab. And I think that's okay. I think it's an evolution, right, that we all go on. So I think that as a younger scientist coming out, yeah, be curious, try them out, download these things that really you don't have to have a computing science background to make and leverage these things now. We are genuinely moving towards a more of a no code world where I don't have to be a Python programmer to use a Python program, because I can ask a prompt into a large language model, say, write me a program in Python to do this. And it can drop me something out on the page. It might not be perfect, but it will give me something to start from. And I think never, with all of these things, never let perfect be the enemy of good. You've just got to try things. So I think, yeah, be super curious and try lots of things. I think it can lead you into very interesting avenues. And I think the more multifaceted your background is, the better.
Right. So that brings me to, because you mentioned about LLMs, and I remember our initial emails which we exchanged was about ChatGPT making medicine. So how closer we are to science reaching that level where we just ask a LLM with some basic data and it comes out with a medicine or a drug. How soon do you think that's going to happen?
I think there's a degree of that's a little bit fanciful in terms of that's just going to happen. But I think what we are going to be able to do is ask large language models far more complex questions, and we'll be able to get answers that we can actually tangibly use. So I see it from our customers often. So historically, what's happened is people ask questions of relational database systems of, I want to find a compound that has a value of less than this and greater than this in another field. And you do those type of logic queries. But people don't want to ask questions in that way anymore. They want to ask a large language, like a natural language question. Tell me what drug we have in our database that has this type of property. Tell me what project it's made for. Tell me how that scientist made that drug. What they want to ask questions that are more sort of natural language fashion. So we need to understand data models to be able to pump those into answer questions that we can answer. But it means that we can start also using the large language model to design things as well. So predict me the type of molecule that would fit these criteria. Give me a compound that would have low hepatic clearance and it would have a high volume of distribution or whatever it may be. We can actually ask large language models to give us a prediction. Scientists are going to leave that running. That there's still a human in the loop part of this that has to happen. So we are going to get these answers back. But I genuinely believe that these are going to be more co-pilots. It's going to be supervised AI rather than unsupervised AI. So ChatGPT is one tool. I think we all use it. And I think it's important that we do, because actually it's a real time saver and a real sort of productivity enhancer if you use it well. But that's where I think we want scientists to use these tools to do the mundane tasks, the things that would take them time, giving them time to really think about the science and to help design the next drugs of the future.
Right. So, Alister, this brings me to just two more questions, and it's all about now. Let's look at this. AI assisting scientists, discovering new drugs, repurposing existing drugs. But then how the regulatory authorities are going to react or going to respond or going to implement their regulations. And where is ethics in all of this? If you could throw some light on that.
Yeah, the ethical questions are a challenging one. I think in preclinical studies, the AI part of it, I don't think there's a real challenge with ethics. There's maybe a challenge in preclinical in more of the intellectual property part of it. Is like if you predict something and it come out of an algorithm, where did the data come from? Who owned the data? So there's an intellectual property discussion to be had there in preclinical. As you move into clinical studies, if we start looking at predictions and we start using AI there, I think as soon as we get closer to the patient, the ethics becomes a more challenging thing to work through. So I think that there will be a degree of us having to navigate quite a tight line here, and it will be very important that we go to the market, we go to our patents, we go to the industry, and we publish our methods. I think this is part of what's going to make it understandable. So, and I think this will go to the fact that the algorithms, the AIs, they are a commodity. So people are going to publish their AI algorithm. What their intellectual property is, that won't be published. That will be theirs, and that's kind of what they will use going forward. So we'll have that tight line. I think as long as we are still having a human in the loop who is looking at the interpretability of the data, I think we'll be okay. The challenge will be if we start using predicted and synthetic data as part of any form of filing to the FDA. I think then we have a challenge, because who's to say that synthetic data will be true? So I think we haven't seen that yet. I don't think that will be very soon. I think every piece of synthetic prediction data we have right now, we back it up with empirical science and we test for it. So the prediction is only to give us a direction of travel. It's not going to be the final bit of data that we go to the FDA with. So as long as we keep that separation, and we understand that this is synthetic, this is real data that we've generated. This was generated supervised, and this was generated unsupervised. I think we'll be fine. But I think there is a line to walk. Again, the closer we get to a patient, the more important that becomes.
Wow. This episode really came out to be like, wow, I am really enamored with all the knowledge which you shared today. And especially how Dotmatics is revolutionizing the life science research. And of course, I wish you all the best after this acquisition. I think things are going to take even faster pace, right? So to conclude, Alister, see, I have interacted with a lot of AI in drug discovery professionals, but I've really seen someone who has this kind of in-depth knowledge about AI in drug discovery. So hats off to you, all the great job you guys are doing there. I feel AI is still underexplored, and guys like you are going to take things forward. And for our audience now, like Alister shared, it is still the tip of the iceberg. There's much more to be scratched. There is more in-depth knowledge which can be explored through AI. And like we discussed, LLMs being used for discovering medicine or repurposing medicine, when it's right here, you have to learn it. You have to become a part of the AI revolution. So thank you so much, Alister, for joining us today. It was nice talking to you. And thank you so much for all that insights which you shared. I wish you all the best. And to our audience, that was our 11th legend who shared how he transformed from a medicinal chemist all the way to global head of Dotmatics. And he is just another example how you can persist, innovate, and grow in your career, of course, and learn the trending technologies of today to become the new age legend. So thank you so much, Alister, and to all of you. See you soon in the next episode. Till then, keep shining. Take care. Bye-bye.